Just to let everyone know, we do anticipate having quorum. We're short one right now, so we'll give it a few minutes.
Good morning, everyone. I apologize. Thank you for your patience. Welcome to the December 14th, 2022 meeting of the Bricktown Urban Design Committee. My name is Ophelia Cancio, and I'm the chair of this committee. When called on, applicants and speakers will come forward to the front podium to speak. Only one person at a time should come to the podium. Please speak into the microphone, identify yourself, and provide your address for the record when you begin speaking. Address your comments to the committee. Please limit your comments to 3 minutes. Citizens may address a committee on agenda items by responding to chair's call for speakers during discussion on each item and signing the speaker's login on the podium. All comments must be relevant to the item being heard. The chair or presiding officer may, in his or her discretion, prohibit a person from addressing the committee and/or remove the person from the council chambers if that person commits any disorderly or disruptive behavior. Please refer to the meeting agenda for more information about these requirements. If you parked in the Sheridan Walker parking garage north of the John Rex Elementary School or in the Arts District parking garage just south of City Hall, staff can provide you with a parking validation ticket. The agenda and documents are located on the okc.primegov.com. You could select the Bricktown Urban Design Committee meeting. Once there, you would click on the agenda item and the related documents will come up below the item. Desiree, will you please call the roll?
Committee Member Cancio.
Present.
Committee Member Wall.
Present.
Committee Member Dotson.
Present.
Committee Member Egon.
Present.
Committee Member McCowan. Committee Member Scaramucci. Committee Member Thompson. Chair, we have quorum.
Thank you. Can I get a motion to approve the minutes for October 12th, 2022?
I motion to approve the previous minutes.
I'll second.
Okay, just waiting here on the system.
We'll have to do a verbal vote.
Okay.
Committee Member Cancio.
Yes.
Committee Member Wall.
Yes.
Committee Member Dotson.
Approve.
Committee Member Egon.
Yes.
Thank you. It has passed.
Great. Continuance requests, there are none. Items on the consent docket, there are none. Cases for individual consideration. Michael, we have
Yes.
2 items.
Yes, Madam Chair, this item was continued from the October 12th, 2022 meeting. At that meeting, there was a lot of discussion about the potential for modifying the site plan to create a pad at the front of the site along East Main Street for a future building. The property owner was given the option of coming back with a plan that showed that change, but they declined, and they have returned to the committee at this time with the same plan, essentially, that was presented to you at the October meeting. There's some minor changes, including the creation of some dedicated pedestrian access from the parking lot straight out to the sidewalk along East Main Street, and some updated site plan and landscape plan information. In addition, you may remember at the October meeting that we had a condition regarding the lighting plan for the parking lot. Since that meeting, the applicant has submitted the plans to staff, showing that the project will be in compliance with the required landscape standards. That information is not in your packet. It's not really part of the design review consideration. A couple of housekeeping items from that October meeting. There were a number of issues raised by the committee at that meeting regarding whether or not parking lot was a permitted use, whether it was a permitted use on this site, and whether or not this lot was considered or defined as a corner lot. In our staff report, we've kind of gone through those three issues, and it is clear in the BC district regs that by the permitted uses, a automotive parking lot as a principal use is a permitted use in and of itself. It doesn't have to be attached to any other particular use or serve as a parking lot for any particular given use. Furthermore, the standards in the parking lot abut a street frontage, so clearly the code does allow standalone surface parking lots that are adjacent to a street. The other major consideration that was discussed at the October meeting was whether or not, by virtue of having a side access on the east side of the property, this lot would be considered a corner lot as defined by the BC code, BC District Code. In the code, it does talk about whether or not parking lots can be located on a corner lot, but the way it's described in the code is a corner lot is the intersection of two public streets. And as this intersecting or attaching drive on the east side of the parking lot is not a public street, this lot does not meet the definition of a corner lot, and therefore the proposed parking lot is permitted on this site. I just want to clear up a couple of those issues from that last meeting. As a result, many of the issues that were discussed in the staff report for the October meeting have since been resolved according to the code, and staff has presented to the committee today a recommendation for the approval of this application. That completes our presentation for you this morning on this case, and we're prepared to respond to any questions the committee may have.
Thank you, Michael. Are there any questions or comments from the committee? Okay, if there's no questions, can I get a motion to approve this item BCA 220012 on 1 East Main Street?
We should probably ask for any comments from the public before
Yes,
we.
thank you. Are there any comments from the public on this item?
I was going to let you keep going. I like where that was headed. David Box, 522 Colcord Drive, here on behalf of the applicant. I was hired after the last time that this came through. I did read the minutes, reviewed the hearing to understand some of the concerns. I think staff did a good job of explaining why this is permitted under the code. One of the things I want to focus on is, when you look at the staff report, as you see every time you have a hearing, it is oftentimes that under Section C, issues and considerations, there's a fairly long narrative presented by staff, because oftentimes, even though something may be allowed under the code, there are still concerns or issues where it may not fully comply. This perhaps is the first time that I have been a part of a case in any of the design review districts that under item C, issues and considerations, the word none has appeared. The reason the word none appears is because there is literally not one thing within the code, the regulations, the guidelines that this application does not conform to 100%. The question as to whether or not we should pull back the parking lot to allow for a pad, when we think about pulling it back, I think what Bon Payne did at the Citizen is a good example, right? He pulled back to allow a pad for a future building, but what he pulled back was a structured parking garage. And what he put on that pullback was a surface parking lot. The surface parking lot was to serve as a temporary placeholder until such time that a building was ready to come forward. And that time is now, if you're following the news. Bond's now coming forward with the Citizen building on what was a surface parking lot. So this use is a temporary use. It's a unique site based upon the fact that we've got this private drive to our east, we've got the elevated railway to our west. There's not a whole lot of uses that could happen there. Now, we're happy for a use in the future to come forward, but in the interim, we think a temporary use as a surface parking lot, as permitted under the code guidelines and regulations, is certainly compatible with the area. So we would ask for your approval. I'm happy to answer any questions or address any concerns you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Box. Are there any comments from the committee or any questions for Mr. Box? Any more comments from the public? Okay. Can I get a motion to approve this item?
I think there's maybe still some discussion. I feel like people are reviewing some of the comments, so maybe a second
us some
before we,
time.
yeah.
Okay.
And I think just going back, I understand the permissible, and I understand where our hands are tied. I think there is a question of, is it wise? And I think unequivocally, the council, at least last time, felt like this was a misuse of that corner, and I think that's where the frustration was. There's obviously a huge difference between where Bond's building is and the amount of parking that's in Bricktown. So we have historically seen in the Bricktown, at least as long as I've been on this committee, buildings being torn down and just remaining as parking lots. And I think that continues to be a downward drag on what we think could be the most prolific district, in our city. So I don't want to speak completely for the committee, but I feel like maybe that summarizes where the conversation was 2 months ago when we last met. Is that fair?
Yeah, so I guess I do have a comment, so we don't have a motion on the floor. I think we had sort of the discourse last time around. I completely understand, I very clearly understand. I appreciate the position, the points made. I reluctantly, because I think I've mentioned that, I office next to this space, so I absolutely understand the dynamics, but I also understand that we have, these design guidelines and this historic preservation district in theory to sort of preserve and or enhance the character of this area. I think, when people acquire properties, there's something to be said for folks who've owned properties before these guidelines were put in place. But when people acquire properties, I think that you understand like the dynamics of what you're getting into in Bricktown, and it's a difficult thing for me to sort of navigate. I wasn't for the demolition, so just as a person with a vote, for whatever it means, because these are sort of not super influential bodies, but advisory bodies. For the most part, I know that legal counsel will have some other opinions about that, but I wasn't for the demolition of the building because it just feels like the track record of demolishing buildings and putting in parking, de-densifying one of the densest, oldest, most historic districts, it doesn't make sense for this sense. I understand economic viability comes into play. I understand all those dynamics. From my standpoint, nothing's changed, so I don't really have anything to move forward from my standpoint. Anyway, so those are my general thoughts.
If I may, I would suggest, and I defer to council, but feelings on previous applications on demolition have absolutely no relevance whatsoever. What's before you is an application to construct a surface parking lot consistent with all ordinances, regulations, and guidelines.
Yeah, so I'm going to assume that was directed towards me, and what I will say is that I still contend that you have this very unique situation, so I'm actually happy for sort of the interpretations of the guidelines and things like that to be settled by folks far smarter and more experienced than myself in regards to, whether that viaduct and where this parking lot sits sort of is some unanticipated or unique circumstance when you start talking about, the dynamic of a corner in the district. It does form the gateway to the district, which were conversations last time. So I appreciate the interpretations. It just, it doesn't seem like any of the perspectives have changed. So not feelings, but perspectives on what we're doing have changed. Feeling-wise, anyway, it's not about feelings, it's about perspective, which is, I think, the intent of the board. So.
And I just want to echo what Michael and David had said, that a surface level parking lot is allowed by right on this parcel of land. It doesn't meet the definition of a corner lot, and I'm afraid this body is limited to the design of, I guess it would be the landscaping and the screening around the parking lot.
So again, I wasn't going to actually say anything because I felt like nothing changed from the last conversation, and Mr. Box and others said that they read the minutes. So, I mean, I appreciate all those things. My sort of purview is to advise on perspectives on the design that's presented, right? So, yeah, I'm not questioning allowable use. I mean, we're talking about, so the staff report and the comments have been talking about those uses, so I've responded to those statements, but I'm not actually talking about the use. I think if you, anyway, so I don't want to dominate this meeting either, so I don't really feel like we're saying anything new, is what I'm saying. I think the discussion's already been had, it feels like.
Are there any comments on the design
Yeah, so
character?
even to the landscaping, for the example that you related for the parking lot that will now be the future site of the Citizen, they actually had a really nice setback of landscaping that looks about 20 feet back that I think we would even appreciate just because it would allow for trees, bushes, anything to soften the look of what would be seen, because it is a gateway. And I think the hardest pill for us to swallow is the guidelines are clear that it says it's not a corner lot, but it sure smells like a corner lot to the rest of us and looks like a corner lot. And I think maybe that's something that we'd probably be advocating for changing in the guidelines in future whenever we have that opportunity for redefining that definition because we're bordered by that railway.
Yeah, so even though we have minutes, maybe they're not thorough enough. So the last discussion was about some of these concerns, but I think it led to the point, at least as I recall, about the design of the parking lot itself and about whether in that location, because it is a very prominent lot, whether in that location this design felt sort of sufficient or consistent. And it doesn't seem like anything has changed in the design, so it doesn't seem like there's a point to rehash those conversations. But I think to Ms. Kagan's point, like that was part of the discourse, was like, for this lot, it just feels like if we're going to put surface parking lots, absolutely allowed use. No, I'm not questioning whether they're allowed uses. There are plenty of parking lots, but whether this is the best sort of design or the best solution given the sort of status of this parcel and location.
Understood. So we have street trees, we have landscape islands throughout the parking lot. We agreed to meet or exceed the guidelines and ordinances as it relates to landscaping. I'm not sure what else an applicant can do, but meet what has been written. I think the public deserves to have a set of rails to know what to meet. And when they do that, it becomes incredibly difficult when there's still concerns raised, right? We've got street trees, we meet or exceed the landscape ordinance, we've got landscaped islands throughout the parking lot. I'm not sure what else can be done.
And I wasn't here at the last meeting, so I don't know if I would have had too much influence on if it would have had a different outcome. But having gone back and looked at the video and kind of tried to follow that conversation, I probably have a little bit of a dissenting opinion where, we don't want to see surface parking lots in Bricktown, but I'm of the opinion that the market kind of drives that. When such time that the value of this land is high enough for a building to be on it, a building will show up there. So, and also I don't really see this as a corner lot myself. I think the elevated rail kind of makes this it's an unusual lot, but I don't see it as a corner lot. So I then kind of go back to the design of it and the landscape part of it. When I'm looking at the site plan, the handicap space on the east side is particularly problematic for me. The 5-foot unloading striped space does not have a ramp or sidewalk attached to it. So therefore, you are literally driving somebody who's in a wheelchair or has a disability into the driveway, which is the in driveway, which is it's a dangerous point right there. So looking at a way that you could make this better would be to actually take all of the ADA spaces and move them over to the east side with the sidewalk. That would then open up all of that street frontage for a little bit more of a landscape setback. You would lose 3 to 4 parking spots out of your total, but then that would then give us a little bit of a buffer between the sidewalk and the actual parking lot and improve the ADA access as well.
So since the last time, these spots on the south, sidewalks were added to connect the ADA loading zone to the sidewalk along Main Street.
Okay.
So we've made that connection now.
Do we have that in our packet?
There you go.
There we go. Okay. That's what I'm looking at. So you see
So see
the space on the east side, it's not attached to an actual sidewalk, okay? So if you are in that striped area, your only way to get to the, I don't even know how you would get to the street from there, to be honest with you. So you either have to go over to one of the other ADA spaces and then connect to the sidewalk, or you literally have to go through the end drive.
We can add concrete to connect that to a sidewalk to bring down to Main. We're fine with that.
But do you understand, a way that a compromise here would be to actually improve all of the ADA parking by moving it to the east with the sidewalk that connects directly to the street. And then those 3 spaces could then become a little bit more of a landscaped buffer area that pushes those parking spaces back away from Main Street.
We can agree that every ADA space will have a sidewalk connection to the sidewalk to get you to the public thoroughfare. We're happy to agree to do that.
Add a sidewalk on the east side?
Yes, from an ADA space to,
Okay.
then bring it down to Main Street. Yes, sir.
So that improves that one spot, but that could also improve the other 3 spots as well. If you move them over to that side, that could provide a really nice ADA string of parking that connects directly to the street and then open up that area for landscape as a design option.
We can agree to that, and we'll make those spots on the south that are currently shown as ADA compact spots.
Is there a certain distance that we want to look for that buffer on the?
I'm sorry. It gives it 3 additional feet of landscaping, is what Mr. Zitzel tells me.
I'm sorry. So I feel compelled just to say, like, I'm a little bit frustrated because, like, so to your point, I don't think there's a lot of difference on the facts of the case here. We had a lot of conversation about things that could be done to improve the pedestrian interaction, right? Which I do think is something that's important, whether we want to acknowledge it or not. That Bricktown is one of the most walkable districts in the city, to improve these sort of safety concerns and things of that nature. So, I mean, I just, for people who said they read the minutes, I mean, I appreciate you actually watching the video. Like, we've had some of these discussions, so we're rehashing the same discussions. So I'm happy that I guess we can sort of walk through those discussions again. It just seems like a redux, because that was sort of a part of the sentiment was the design was an opportunity for a design that at least promoted, right, and improved those safety and walkability aspects on the parking lot that's being presented.
So what we're proposing now is to move all the ADA spaces to the east, make them all accessible to a sidewalk, and making those spaces along the south compact spaces, which will provide an extra 3 feet of landscaping.
Is there a connectivity for sidewalk on the west side as well? I guess we also want to connect the west and the east to the front. Towards the street. There's a sidewalk that kind of ends there. It doesn't connect to the main street on the west side.
So we'll have to bring it up to connect.
Okay, so there's going to be connectivity from the west to the front, and on the east side, then you said you're going to do compact spaces, get us an additional 3 feet on the frontage for landscaping.
Right. So one of the other things I think that's important, if you look at the RTA's plan, every plan that they show has this particular lot slated to be elevated rail at some point when the RTA reaches its full potential. And so, frankly, there's not a whole lot of other things we could do here that my client could go seek permits for, right? If the RTA's plan is to utilize this for an elevated rail at some point, this becomes the only use we can make of it until such time that that happens, so.
So I just want to reinforce, we're talking about the design of this allowed use, which is a parking lot. The last conversation I remember having with Johnson Associates and representatives who were here was about what kinds of things would be preferred. And some of my colleagues here actually gave a lot of feedback on how to make this entrance. Do we agree that it's an entrance to Bricktown? I mean, I am curious about that. So if we agree that this is an entrance to Bricktown, it's like how to make this design sort of a little bit more in keeping with the connectivity between the viaduct, between EK Gaylord, and the fact that this is a trafficked area. How to improve the safety, the look, the experience of this what is an entry point to Bricktown. That's where the conversation ended. It wasn't necessarily even about allowable use. I appreciate those things being sort of clarified, but it was about design. So not about future uses, but it was about design. So if those are the sort of the concessions that are being proposed, I mean, I think that's something that we can consider, right?
Well, so in our last meeting, there were a couple of were those taken into consideration in this presentation?
No, they weren't.
Can you point out what was changed from previous?
Sure. Mark Zitzai with Johnson Associates. Address is 20 Sheridan Avenue. I think I would respectfully disagree. We did add the connections back to the parking lot. We slightly revised the landscaping. But the crux of the discussion at the last meeting was about the use. We talked about pulling it back to allow for a future building. The pedestrian experience remains unchanged, except that we're adding landscaping. Right now it is a vacant lot. The sidewalks exist, the street trees exist, the site lighting exists. So we're not doing anything that would further detract from the pedestrian experience that doesn't exist today. I agree it is an entry point into Bricktown, but I think every entry point into Bricktown has parking lots. You look at Reno, there's a parking lot on the north, there's a parking lot on the south. You look at Sheridan, there's a parking lot on the north, and this one, there's a parking lot on the south. So this would in no way be a unique project, but I think further to David's most recent comment, our client is limited on what he can build here. We believe that if we come in with a building permit, we will not be granted a building permit because of future RTA plans. The rail that cuts through Deep Deuce is what is being proposed out to Midwest City into the Tinker area that will have elevated rail coming back south through this property and tying back into the elevated railway. So I think the last discussion was about use, but further, this is the only use that we could put on the property. I asked multiple times at the last meeting, what can we do to this parking lot? Where do you want landscaping? What else do you want to see? And the comment was, we don't want to see a parking lot. It wasn't until Richard brought up adding an additional building or a pad site for a building, that was the only comment that we were directed to go back with. We are not open to leaving a pad site for a future building when we know that building is not viable. So if there's other discussion, like Commissioner Wall just brought up, about making sure that ADA spaces have pedestrian access, or you want to see particular landscaping placed where, we're happy to engage in that. But to this point, we've really not been given specifics. This is an underwhelming parking lot design.
So to that point, I think you're absolutely right. As an entrance through Bricktown, we don't want to see a parking lot. So gaining that 3 feet that you're saying that we could have potential gain if you put in, what other landscaping there visually heightens the view of pedestrians coming through or traffic coming in, because right now it's not obstructed by the landscaping that you have, I would think, because Nandina is not going to necessarily be tall enough, at least the most that I see. Or what's this other? But can you further, I know we just put that on there, but what else allows that to, I would say green space, people have a more appealing look at that when you're walking as a pedestrian or driving versus seeing a parking lot. So I would say that a new parking lot visually deters and takes away from the experience versus green space.
Sure, so we have 3 parking spaces that look out, that abut the street. Your guidelines and your codes call for that to be screened in various ways. The option is up to the designer. In this case, the white fence is remaining, and then additional landscaping has been put up that meets code. If the desire is a row of hedges that screen that, those are 3 feet tall, again, that's something we would agree to. But I think part of this committee is to be offering feedback on what it is you want to see, rather than we just don't like the parking lot design.
I think we're trying to do that now.
Right, and so if it's a row of hedges, we would agree to that. If it's
Well, I'm not a landscape architect. There's things that I don't know. By gaining this 3 feet, what other vegetation is allowed to be there? And I see that maintaining the fence is wonderful, but it kind of bisects it right now, so I don't know how visually that would read when walking by, that it's not aligned in any way with the new landscaping. But that's all just me seeing it in plan. I understand when we're walking it and experiencing it, we're not going to see it the same way. But if you can elaborate there of what we can gain landscaping-wise, I think that will help me.
Absolutely. So if by picking up the additional 3 feet, that would give us the opportunity, it would give us the necessary width. If it was a row of evergreens, a row of shrubs, we would have the necessary depth that would open us up to many different types of plantings.
Rough size.
In terms of height,
Height, width, yeah. What could we expect to be there as a new versus a mature planting? Because obviously this will be here for a while.
sure. I think the desire on our end to meet screening but still have some visibility into the lot would be some sort of row hedge that would be 36 to 48 inches tall.
Everybody's looking at me as the landscape architect in the room. Yeah. When I look at this, and I mean, I could, some of these plant choices probably are something that I wouldn't want to do, but it's also something that we kind of run into, and it's something that we talk about up here a lot. Is just how our code defines our urban spaces. By code, we've got to have a tree within 75 feet of every one of these parking spaces. So that starts to have weird tree placement because you're just trying to get that tree in the spot where it's going to have that coverage. So the two trees that are down along Main Street, one is pretty close to the curb on the east side. That could probably be a little bit, a little bit more root space given for that tree. The Burford holly is not one that I like to use. The freeze that we had in February of 21 really took a lot of those out, so that it's just not a shrub that we're using very much anymore. But then we're talking about trying to have an evergreen hedgerow here, which usually plays into the designer trying to get their evergreen points for the parking lot, which then it sort of becomes ubiquitous. I would love to see some sort of ability for us to have landscaping that sort of shows what Oklahoma is and where Oklahoma is, or where Oklahoma City is located, which would be more grasses and things that are a little bit more indicative of the prairie where we live. So we're sort of hamstringed a little bit by the code. We have to get these evergreen points, and that typically manifests itself in these sort of straight hedgerows that are clipped and chopped and all those things. So would I like to see a much more robust landscape plan? Absolutely. I don't know how to achieve everything that we need to do unless you sort of do the fallback to evergreen shrubs in a row. So I would like to have more specifics, but I can at least give my philosophy.
This is a little reminiscent of kind of when we had the LED signs, and the code didn't allow for us to actually speak to the frustration that we were all, it wasn't right. And so I think, for you guys, what stinks is you're actually following code all the way across the board, and you've got a committee that is quite frustrated that you're following code across the board. And so, I would say that for me, what this does is it says we need to revisit what we have in place because it's not adequate. And, even looking at this, it's like, I think there's gateways into Bricktown should be different. And so, but I don't know what we do outside of saying we have reached, they've done what code has asked?
I think what I'm hearing from the committee too, and applicant is willing to do, is that improve the pedestrian experience, given that Bricktown is the pedestrian district, to somehow use the landscaping to improve that experience through there. And then, is that?
Yeah, I'd like to make a few more points. It feels like we, maybe, I mean, it's on video, so maybe my intent was not clear. What I felt like, and I'm happy that you're here today as having more expertise on landscape architecture. We don't necessarily always have a landscape architect here. We have folks with the prerequisite experience of the body. What I felt like or wanted to have said last time, and maybe I didn't communicate it clearly for sure, is this, to my knowledge, right, and about 12 or 15 years of me paying attention to what's happening in Bricktown, the first parking lot that I know of being added in one of the gateway corridors. So you're right about where parking is. In part, I think, has to do a lot with railroad right-of-way and how these sort of things have sort of manifested, right? But those were existing, at least predating the last 10 or 15 years, right? I mean, I think there have been some refurbishments, things like this. This is sort of essentially new. And what I felt like I was taking away, we did recall what Richard's statements were, and I appreciated that because I understood the debate we were having about the use and the rights, and I feel like I made a point about trying to be respectful of rights and understanding there's some balance, I feel like, in these districts. But in this case, what I felt like or was wanting to say is I have a lot of confidence in Johnson Associates and in others on this team. This is, in my mind, a gateway. I mean, I walk it all the time. My employees walk it all the time. Like something that sort of sets a standard for moving towards more walkability and things like that as a gateway. And I feel like I might have done this, but I think I referenced the way we've improved, like the lighting in those viaducts. We've added artwork to those viaducts. Like we've done all these things to the underpasses, right? We've done all these things to make that experience, to encourage people to come in. I'm not denying what things look like, but I am sort of suggesting that from a design standpoint, not a right of use standpoint, what can we do to do that? Is this the best that we can offer? And if it's the best, I mean, I defer to the comments of folks who are a lot more detailed in landscape architecture. Is this sort of the best foot forward from a design standpoint that we could have for the frontage, not even the parking lot, because I really don't care about what's in the backside of it, but for the frontage and what that looks like? That's my question, and I am not a designer. So I would actually expect some of the answers. I mean, you guys have wowed me with designs of previous things that have come along, and this doesn't seem to fit that sort of criteria or expectation. That's really all I'm saying.
Is the client able to provide any sort of perspective or renderings of what the walkability experience could be in order to meet the design intent that we have envisioned for the district?
Well, I think at the end of the day, it's a parking lot, right? So the streetscape exists. The city put it in. There are brick pavers in it. The street trees exist. The lighting exists. We're just going to further add landscaping, right? So I'm sure if we absolutely needed to, we could put something together, but I don't know that from what I'm hearing, it's really going to change anyone's opinion on the walkability of the site. It's a surface parking lot. There's nothing really to render in that regard. What we're talking about is keeping this fence and adding basically a site-proof wall of evergreen shrub plantings. So I don't know what that would aid.
I really think it would help. I know that intent of hearing from the committee is you guys are going to add a little bit more connectivity from the sidewalks on the east and the west. We're going to move some of the parking lot in order to deepen that area. What are the next steps that we can take that would make the committee more in line to help move this forward? Are we requesting that they come back with some renderings, some perspectives, some more robust landscaping plan? Or are we requesting for them to agree to these things and for us to pass it in a condition of these things? So what are the next steps that we can take here?
Mark, I'm curious, is the statue moving, the buffalo statue, and or is the fencing, to me, that looks like a more highlighted feature of the site on the site plan, whereas when I look at this street view, it's kind of tucked behind a fence and a pole, and
Well, so I office across the street, and recently I saw that it had fallen into two. So I don't know. What? Can you give me a second? The buffalo statue. Give me 1 second. During Halloween, there were some folks that had destroyed the buffalo. So we were showing keeping it. It is now in disrepair and was in multiple pieces the last time I saw it. So.
I think if we've agreed that we do have some flexibility on moving those ADA spots, gaining a little bit more of landscape area, and I think the body would like to see how that looks, how the new connections are, and then what that new opportunity for landscaping would look like.
So we're happy to provide that to staff. We're happy to commit to that. We're even happy I'll come for free at the next hearing and present it with pretty pictures. But we want to vote today. We can agree to all these concessions. We can agree to provide them to staff. We can agree to have staff email them to you, whatever capacity you want to see them, but it doesn't change the nature of the application.
so and I'll let legal correct me if I'm wrong, I think we could consider approving the parking lot with the conditions that have been addressed about the changes to the configuration of the spaces, with the condition, and then with the additional condition that revised landscaping come back to the committee for additional review,
That's correct.
for kind of a final blessing on the landscaping, if that's,
No, we want
No.
the final blessing today.
okay.
We're happy to come present it, but we're giving you more than the code requires at this point.
And you all can do that too. I don't mean to say that you can't. I was trying to get to a happy place where they could move forward on something and address your concerns. But if they want a vote, then.
So I didn't realize the buffalo was destroyed and not coming back. Is there an intent to replace it with a new piece of artwork, or it would just be some shrubs in this corner now?
The client has contacted the artist that did it. So he's trying to find a way to get something back there.
He's working with the artist right now to get a different one. It might not have the nickel on it, so we'll likely have to come back as an
There'll be
amendment
some
to the CA.
Art
to place
feature
it.
to come back in place
Correct.
in
Can we
replacement.
commit to
Okay.
that? Can we commit that we will have some sort of art piece in that area? Well, may not be, but we can commit that there will be a piece of art if that gets us to the finish line.
Catherine, am I understanding correctly that we can approve this with the condition of these particular items, then the client will submit that back to us for review for a final? Do we have an opportunity to comment on that again when we receive that for another review, and if we're not satisfied or if it doesn't meet the vision?
So what they are asking for is for all of it to be approved with the condition that it be submitted to staff, but that they'd be happy to come back and present it to the commission again. At that point, they wouldn't be asking for an additional approval on that. It would all be approved. It would just be an informational presentation. I think you all have the ability to make it returning to the committee a condition, but the applicant would need to agree to that condition. And it doesn't sound like they want to go that way, so.
Just one final comment that I want to make, because I do understand what the requests or the conditions that are sort of being discussed. I really just want to speak to what the perceptions of what sort of is acceptable. So I feel like the latter part of this meeting have similar to the latter part of the last meeting, have sort of bridged the actual sort of facts before us, if you will, on thoughts about the design and what it feels like and looks like for people driving in, walking into Bricktown and having this bit of frontage. If I recall correctly, again, I may not, I might have just dreamt it up, but the latter part of the conversation in the last meeting was a lot about the frontage and less about the use. The fact that there will be parking here is, I think, accepted. So I don't know that there's not movement. I get that it is painful, actually, for sure. But I just want to make that comment in regards to the requests that are being made, and because it does sound like there is some progress made being towards like just putting forth a best effort. I appreciate a lot of the last part of this conversation, to be clear, because we're clarifying things that weren't, from my knowledge, clarified before, both about intent on landscaping, about the art at the corner, all these kinds of things, which I feel like are in keeping with going into, if you're talking about like just basic little plazas, like little features that we see people refer to. I mean, I remember us having a conversation with the two hotels, I think one of them is AC, on how they would do their trash enclosure. And I don't mean to bring it up as a minuscule thing, but it was just like an opportunity to create little interesting points when you start talking about walkability, understanding that we need a trash enclosure between these two buildings. It was like, let's just do something creative, because this is a preeminent part of the pedestrian, tourist, visitor experience, and sort of a jewel for the community. So anyway, I want to make that comment because I actually think differently than what I feel like is being said as far as what the movement is. I'm not actually debating the allowable uses, but what happens with this frontage feels like it's of interest.
And I mean, we're here, so tell us what kind of plant material you want to see. My client is here and is agreeable. You tell us what you want to see, and we'll agree to it.
I don't know how to read these plans, I apologize. Is that light pole staying where it is in existence, near the Buffalo?
Yes.
It's staying right there, okay. Since the Buffalo's already moved, can it be moved to a location that's not tucked behind a light pole feature that does make it a little bit more pronounced in a way that isn't obstructed by view? And just in the help that, hey, let's draw focus somewhere else if we're trying not to draw focus to a parking lot. And I am going to be fussy, and a row of evergreens is going to be just as much of an attraction to be like, oh, they're hiding a parking lot, as if you could try to make something a bit more natural and intent and have a little bit more visual activity of interest versus an evergreen fence. That's just if there's a way to make it a little bit more visually exciting rather than just a wall of greenery. Yes, I'm trying to obstruct it, but how can we make it more visually attractive as you're passing by? I don't know if that makes sense to anyone or helpful.
I think Commissioner Wall's point, we can do native grasses. I think that's fine. We're open to suggestions.
So, we can't tell you specific plants to use up here. I can tell you, looking at the plant schedule, that there are literally no species that are from North America on this list. They're all Asian varieties. And these are, they're very, to be honest with you, very basic landscape plants that are highly available at any nursery. I think what we would like to see is something that reflects, when was the last time you saw a buffalo standing in a a field of Nandino. I mean, and I know that that's you know, kind of snarky, but you know, if we have a buffalo statue there, you know, the buffalo statue on 23rd and Broadway is a good example of a nice placement of art into some sort of contextual landscape of, you know, grasses, wildflowers, those kinds of things. So, I mean, I think that's what we're trying to go for here, is that if you're not from Oklahoma and this is your one time to come to Oklahoma City and come to Oklahoma, people want to see the plants that are from Oklahoma.
Sure.
If you go to the High Line in New York, they use our plants. I mean, they are highly adaptable, high heat tolerant, low water use. We're sort of behind the times in our own environment where other people are using our aesthetic. I would love to see that sort of come here, and I can't dictate that from up here, but that would be great to see.
We can commit that all plant varieties will be from North America as another condition.
Any other comments? I think, like we talked before, I would like to see the connectivity with just the access for, you know, walking from the parking lot and then to the frontage part. So I know we already talked about that and that's going to be addressed. So are there any other comments from the committee?
And I'll just note, as was discussed, if and when they come back with a new art piece, since that buffalo is gone, you all will review that, and that would be another opportunity to see, you know, how that is placed and landscaping around it and that sort of thing.
Can we just go through the conditions that we have
Yes.
required or discussed that you have agreed to for approval?
Let me show you what I think
Okay,
we have.
thank you.
The 3 ADA spaces on the south will be moved to the east so that all ADA spaces are along the east with connectivity to a sidewalk that will exist on the east that will connect down to Main Street. That will give us 3 additional feet of landscaping on the south, which will be plant varieties from North America.
Those spaces become compact.
Compact.
And the statue or the piece of art will be replaced with a new piece of art.
Yes, and we'll likely have to go through Arts Commission or something for that, but yes.
Okay.
I've got a 9-year-old that's a fantastic artist, so she's available for commission.
All of this. Yeah. We did talk about, and just to clarify, the connectivity on that sidewalk on the west side coming down, east side coming down, so that people, when they park, they don't have to come through the parking, they can just directly connect to the sidewalk. Is that?
So the sidewalk would be from the edge of where the ADA is. If we did sidewalks the whole way, then we have no landscaping up that eastern stretch. So the sidewalks would be from where the ADA spots are down to Main Street.
Is landscaping required along this not public drive?
I don't think it is.
The landscaping is required to be within certain feet of parking spaces. So in essence, yes, we have to have a certain amount of landscaping.
Okay. Because, and the reason why I asked, let me clarify, because that's probably one of the larger pedestrian sort of challenges with people getting back in and out of that lot. So right now they cut across the what is a grassy knoll or whatever. But I mean, people will be more encouraged actually to walk just in the street. And it's not like it's heavily trafficked, but yeah, that's unfortunate.
How wide is that sidewalk on the west side?
I think right now it's hatched.
There is no
as like a
sidewalk on the
turf.
west side. It's turf.
Yeah.
Oh, that's turf. Okay, so
Yes.
it's not a sidewalk. Sorry. I was
Correct.
Not catching on. Is there a sidewalk along there for those parking? Okay.
No, it would be similar to any other parking lot that you go to where you walk out to Main Street. And so where you'll be able to enter that is going to be through the ADA loading zone. There'll be a ramp and then a sidewalk that will connect you down. So the code speaks to when pedestrian circulation within parking lots is required, and it is parking lots that are much larger than
So
this.
those ADA, I think one of the things that we agreed on is that ADA parking is going to move to the east side, is that correct?
Correct.
So there's not gonna be any more ADA, but you're keeping a connectivity there so that people can connect through there instead of walking behind those cars.
Correct.
Okay,
We will add sidewalk to the east where the ADA spaces are to connect the sidewalk down to the sidewalk that exists on Main Street.
okay. Is there any other comments from the committee? Did we get all of the items, the conditions addressed? Okay. All right, I'm gonna try to make this motion.
Because you're chair, you can't. Somebody else has to.
Okay, that saves me. Can somebody else make a motion?
I'll try. Let me start at the beginning. I motion to approve the parking lot with the conditions that the ADA 3 spots will move to the east with ramp and connectivity to sidewalk. An additional condition that it becomes compact spots at the south, allowing for 3 feet of additional landscaping where North American species will be used for landscaping purposes. Did I miss anything? And that the art piece is replaced in kind. We know it might not be exactly the buffalo, but replaced in kind. With also connectivity to the south to Main Street on the west side.
East side.
East side and I think we're talking about both the east side and then the west side we talked about.
Just the east.
Just a little part, we said that where the current ADA is so that people don't have to walk behind those parked cars to connect to the south.
So all the ADA spaces are moving to the east?
Yes.
With a connection?
I think we were trying to figure out make sure that we have a pedestrian connection in the area where we've now committed to compact car parking. Does that make sense?
I'm sorry, say that one more time.
So the area that we've now converted to compact parking with the former ADA area.
You want a connection there?
Make sure that we have a connection to the street
That's fine.
there. Okay.
We'll have a connection there.
Do I need to do that motion again?
I think you did.
I think it's encapsulated.
All right, do I have a second?
I'll second.
What the hell is that?
Yours came up, mine didn't.
Yours didn't come up still. No. You're there.
Yeah, I know.
Try and hit that again.
Yeah, we got it. Wait a second.
Sandino's voting
Thing's not working.
not coming up.
I'm sure it's intentional.
We'll do a verbal vote. Committee Member Thompson, how do you vote?
I'm gonna vote against the item. Yeah, so I'm a nay.
Thank you.
And thank you all. We know this one was a hard one.
Yes, thank you.
We appreciate you all. Have a good one.
Okay, we have second item, go ahead, Michael.
Next item on the agenda is item 6B, BCA 22-00014 at 25 South Oklahoma Avenue. This is a proposal for a new elevator to replace some existing pedestrian access ramps at the northwest corner of Oklahoma Avenue Bridge and the Bricktown Canal. Essentially, what you see before you in this proposal is a twin tower elevator to the one that exists on the south side of the canal at this location. Now, the ramps that are being replaced on the north side were approved recently, like I think 2019, and they were installed, but there are other ADA issues that need to be improved essentially at this location, as well as a new ADA ramp on the east side of the ACM UCO building that sits immediately adjacent to this site. So we've prepared an analysis of the application and the submittal for your consideration. The primary consideration is that this is a glass and steel tower as opposed to a brick structure, which is most of what we like to see in Bricktown. However, given that we already have the one tower across the canal that's already designed in the glass and steel motif, we're supportive of the idea of matching that design with the elevator tower at the north side of the canal. So in essence, we've prepared a recommendation for the committee to approve this application, and we're prepared to respond to any questions the committee may have.
Thank you, Michael. Are there any comments or questions from the committee?
If I'm correct, to install the elevator, it removes and replaces a ramp that was just put in place a year or two ago?
Probably in the last 2 years, yeah.
Yeah, okay. I'm fine with that. I think the only comment I have is when looking at the application, everything's galvanized, and what you're replacing is galvanized, but one thing that I saw on the original application, for what we're removing, it's supposed to be painted, so it doesn't stand out as bright, brand new galvanized ramping and things. So I would like to see that come back and have it painted rather than leaving it as exposed galvanizing, just because for the ramp itself, I think the concept, I don't personally have a problem with the elevator and its look, but just to clean up any of the structure that comes up underneath and hide it. I'm a structural engineer, but yeah, let's hide it. Please paint it, would be my only request before approval. But I don't know if anybody else has any other comments.
Is this matching the same material and look exactly of the other one? Is that correct? Did I catch up to that correctly? Okay. And so if we were to paint it, is it gonna match the same, like paint? Is it the other one painted as well?
The steel, Patrick Schoenfeld Studio Architecture, the steel structure that makes the hoistway, the original one was a painted steel. We came back in and added a new high performance coating. It's a metallic coating that performs really well. It's zinc rich, so it weathers extremely well. So that's what we were proposing to do. We're essentially trying to reproduce that. The only thing that's really different in this design from the one across the canal is that one has board form concrete all the way up to the elevated walkway area. We're bringing this all the way down to the canal level with glazing, with glass glazing. We're really trying to activate that side of the canal. Right now, there's not good accessibility, especially at the canal level. You have to go all the way down to where you pick up the water taxis off of Mickey Mantle and traverse that whole way to get down to that lower level of the canal. So we're trying to activate that, and then also there's an elevation change just west of Oklahoma Avenue that we're also trying. So it's going to be a 3-stop elevator that'll be at the canal level, go up to the the elevated lower level, and there's another elevated level that we're going to try and handle that. That's what that big ramp system along the canal was doing. It's really cumbersome, not real attractive, trying to open that area up and re-engage that area. I think the city it's a really important project to the city to try and activate. Because right now that part of the canal is not very active right now. There's not anything going on.
Yeah.
And we're going to light it with LEDs inside. So it'll tie to, we're going to make it where it ties to the Bricktown Canal. They've got a whole light system with all the LEDs. So all that'll be coordinated and tied into each other so they can actually do light shows and things like that.
Nice.
Committee Member Egan, I think you were talking about the galvanized ramps and stairs that are being replaced by this elevator having to have been painted.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, there were some on the...
They weren't painted. There is, as far as I can tell from these plans, all of that is being removed.
Well, on this side, but it's still going to exist on the other side because it's not part of the project.
We're going to rebuild it,
But
because those
I
are
want-
non-compliant, that's a non-compliant
No,
ramp.
I'm happy for you to replace what was input in.
The only thing we're trying to do with a full, just keep it galvanized. This is just a maintenance issue.
I understand that, and I agree.
It's just one that we can put a zinc-rich paint on it and probably get a 10-year coating out of that, but it will be something that will have to be maintained.
So tell me again then, so it's not going to have a black paint on it on the handrails or
The handrails, we will reproduce the railing system that is prevalent through the whole Bricktown Canal. There's a small picket system there, so we were going to do that. But the handrails inside there, to make it a compliant handicap ramp, we were planning on just galvanizing those just from a maintenance standpoint. And there will be the steel, we're going to have to do steel stringers and all that, because that whole structure we're having to replace because it just doesn't work there presently. But I guess we can go ahead and paint it.
That's going to be
It's just a parts issue.
Sue Hollenbeck, Special Projects Manager, Executive Manager, City Manager's Office. We can go ahead and do that. I am worried about the maintenance issues and and what budget that comes out of, to be brutally honest. So Parks and Rec Department maintains the canal and everything around it and maintains all of that. So we want to make sure that whatever maintenance that we do and anything new in Bricktown, that takes that into consideration. So our main goal of putting this in was ADA accessibility for that west side, north side of the canal. And then also to make it look like it's always been there and to match 100% what is directly across the canal from this new one.
Yeah,
Does that answer your question?
I'm still just trying to, I did look at this, I promised previously, so it's existing. So really there's, in the scope, because you're removing so much of that existing ramp,
Correct.
it was really the underside that's such a
Correct.
eyesore, that really that's non-existent in the new design concept.
Right, all of that existing ramp, and remember that ramp only goes up to street level and about 36 inches.
Yeah.
It does not go to canal level, so
Right.
all of that gets removed, and then the new shaft for the elevator gets put in all the way down, and will match beautifully with it, which is what is on the other side. So all of that you see up there, that kind of gray steel and support system will be removed.
All that's gone. And it's just left with the existing elevated landings.
Mhm,
and
correct.
Where we're coming in with the new elevator.
And then we're working with Parks to make sure that's all landscaped well.
Okay.
But we
And-
just want to be very cognizant of everybody else's budget and what
Oh,
happens.
yeah. No, I understand that you usually can't coat something after it's galvanized, and I commend those that try. It usually doesn't last. So the only other ramp that's getting completely replaced in kind will also be just galvanized with the painted handrail. But that's better than what's already there right now, because
Right.
it's just all galvanizing.
Right, we're replacing, we're working with ACM at UCO to replace the non-compliant ADA ramp on Oklahoma, to make that usable, and also with the construction and everything, so they have the ability to have that into their building. But all in all, I think it's gonna make aesthetically that area incredibly better visually and then also functionally.
Just out of curiosity, that original landing that's there, that's rusting, was it galvanized as well? And it's just the coatings deteriorated?
The original landing.
Yeah,
one
the
that we're taking
existing
down?
one that's getting replaced
It's
essentially.
all galvanized right now. It
Okay.
does have a picket, railing picket system
Yeah.
that matches all of the
Yeah,
others. But
it's just-
everything else there, all the columns, the stringers, and it has a steel grating for flooring, that's all galvanized material.
And that's, the existing is galvanized. I
That
just
is
see a lot of
existing.
rust on it, surprisingly.
The
but
one thing, the one
coating-
change we're going to make is that galvanized grating is very slick, especially when it's wet. So we're gonna come in with a textured
Okay.
steel grating system that allows for good traction and things, because that, right now, that's been a real complaint, and it's a hazard.
Yeah. Okay, I'm done with my questions. Thanks, guys.
Okay, thank you.
I had a quick question about the board formed concrete. I understand that we're matching the other elevator tower across the way. Prior to that elevator tower being constructed, are there other instances of board formed concrete in Bricktown? And I can kind of see it's like street level is brick, and then it seems like everything below kind of goes to this concrete kind of. Is that canal experience, are you walking through a sea of concrete, is that an opportunity to bring the brick down? Maybe philosophical, I'm just wondering if we keep putting these instances of board formed concrete, does that now become a new district material that we're going to start seeing in other places? So there's a little bit of precedent.
We'd originally proposed maybe cladding it with a brick veneer, but the Parks Department felt really strongly about keeping the board formed concrete there and trying to keep that same character down there. Because, it does have you do see the graining of the wood cast into the concrete, see the tie holes, and there's a real aesthetic to that some people don't like and some people do, but that was a decision that the Parks Department wanted us to maintain.
Yeah. And I would say, so precedent or the potential for kind of setting that tone, noted, right? But I would say that particularly it feels like on the canal level, that's something that I've noticed and seen, both maybe kind of contextually as how those things were built, but even how it was rebuilt in the canal. So it doesn't necessarily bother me as much because I probably have that similar sentiment, but whether that sets a tone for somewhere else, it may be just something that we need to sort of pay attention to from a guideline standpoint about where those uses are taking place.
Well, and I think significantly, as you mentioned, you're updating and revising the lighting to not be as dismal as what's there, which is drastically going to improve the feel of board formed concrete everywhere else, that you're not walking into a scary concrete box right there. So if the lighting, that will help immensely in that area.
Yeah, I like it as a material. I was just kind of wondering what the thought process was there.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Lastly, you said there's going to be some landscaping in this area. Can we get a commitment to North American plants only?
While we're on a roll.
It's kind of a joke, but are we going to see those landscape plans come before us?
The one thing I like about this design too is that where the other ones are much more opaque at the canal level, this one, and the elevator itself is a glass car, so it's really improved ridership experience, and there's some accountability now that you see. You can see the occupants within the. Now we do have a patterned glass, and we're going to reproduce that same patterned glass on the hoistway. That's a fritted ceramic frit that's on there to. It just kind of gives it a little bit of a character and things. So.
Any more questions? Any comments? Any more comments?
I would make a motion to approve if.
Oh, was there going to be a comment?
Oh.
Go ahead.
Do it.
My name's Chad Huntington, and I'm a neighbor to this district. I'm sorry, my address is 7 South Mickey Mantle Drive, and I'm the owner of Water Taxi on the Bricktown Canal. I've been associated with Water Taxi since 1999, so I've seen the canal since before it was actually opened, and took over management in 2002 and purchased the company several years ago. But my office about 10 years ago moved. It's moved again since, but my office moved very close to this location, and that was when I first really became aware of the deficiency from a pedestrian standpoint. I appreciate everything that everyone has said. I'm also the chair of the Bricktown Association, and that's a board comprised of stakeholders, bid ratepayers, merchants like myself, and appreciate very much the focus on pedestrian. If you think about this space, you can't get there from here. This really came about, actually, a member of your committee who's not here today, Richard McCown, and I participated in a ULI trip in 2014 to San Antonio, and we visited the Riverwalk, and one of the things that you really notice when you're at the Riverwalk versus the Bricktown Canal is the permeability. So when you are on the on one side and you want to go there, even if you miss your opportunity, there's another opportunity. You have continuous opportunities to move between levels, and the Bricktown Canal doesn't have this. And so, you know, there's a little bit of difference, of course, in the way those two areas came about. But and I did want to mention just real quick related to the concrete. Sorry to deviate, but related to that concrete, I know for a fact that that was actually inspired by several things. Number one, the BNSF Railway Viaduct, which is the same sort of poured-in-place concrete, which recently was painted beige, but it used to be that same pink concrete color. And then also, there are multiple buildings in the district that have poured-in-place ceilings or floors that are actually, a really good example is Skyline on the Bricktown Canal. If you go into that building, you can look up and you can see, again, the wood grain poured in place. So I think that was a very conscious decision, design decision that was made whenever they did that. And there's also corten steel throughout the area. So the canal itself has its own aesthetic. Yeah, exactly. So the thing that I began to notice, like I said, about a decade ago, even though I'd been down there for 2 decades, was just the lack of availability getting back and forth between levels. And I actually have photos that I started taking of people carrying their own wheelchairs down the steps, of people carrying babies in strollers, which seems very dangerous to me, and of people with, you know, the other thing is that mobility is not necessarily limited to just somebody being in a wheelchair. It can be somebody who has luggage, which happens very often in Bricktown. It can be somebody who broke their ankle and they're on crutches. It can be somebody who actually has vision deficiencies. So it's really important. We see those people all the time in Bricktown, and we really feel strongly that this needs to happen. So appreciate so much the Downtown Oklahoma City Partnership about 2015 commissioned a study of canal accessibility via the OU Institute for Quality Communities, and they came down and actually made this recommendation at that time. So it's been, you know, this long to kind of get it to fruition. So the Parks Department began to really understand it. I had conversations with Parks, who's I contract to the Parks Department, and began to really understand the need for it. But of course, Parks is, you know, perennially underfunded, and they really didn't have any funding to put to it. So I really also want to give credit to the city manager's office and Sue Hollenbeck behind me, who, whenever they had an opportunity with some funds that they were trying to dedicate, she called and said, what would most benefit the canal area right now that we could spend these dollars on? And I said, an elevator right there, because that actually, it shortcuts that whole process, which I believe has also been an extreme barrier to commercial development. When you're talking about that block west of this location, it's dead. and it has remained dead since 1999. It did have Cholinos, but and ACM came in, but I really feel like this has been a barrier to the activation on that canal level, and would just urge very much that that you give it full consideration.
I'll second.
Thank you. Yeah. Can we get a motion?
No, Jonathan's moved.
You already
I'll
motioned.
second.
Mr. Huntington
Okay.
interrupted my motion. I was on that trip too to San Antonio, by the way.
Okay, just waiting for this to pop up. Okay, the motion passes. Thank you. Thank you. Moving on to other business, there is none. Administrative approval reports. There are 2 items on there.
Yeah, one is just the addition of a man door at the south elevation of the Brickopolis building to complete their renovation at that first floor level. And the second item is just a temporary off-site construction staging area for the project that the committee approved earlier this year at 123 and 129 East Main.
Okay. Are there any more comments on this? Okay. So any comments from planning department staff?
I'll just note, my buttons are not cooperating. We are planning on having another committee training sometime in the spring. I can't remember if I've told you all this already or not. We've been saying it at all of our committee meetings. So that's the training that we do for all of our design review commissions, committees, planning commission, arts commission, board of adjustment, and we'll get you dates and times and location for that when we have that settled.
So spring being a little bit later than it's typically done?
So last
meaning-
year we did it March 4th, and I think
Okay.
we'll aim for about that time again. Pre-spring break, hopefully post icy roads and bad weather
Gotcha.
is kind of the goal. And if you all have any ideas or requests for content that you would like to be included in that training, or to be not included in the training for that matter, let us know.
How we go about updating guidelines? Will be our first suggestion, or how we have input from things that we've learned and
So there
recent
is
meetings.
we're in the midst of an update to all of Chapter 59. That will be a multi-year process. That would be one opportunity to make changes to the Bricktown regulations and guidelines. I think in the interim, commissions and committees can always call a special meeting and have a workshop to talk through things that, particular to your district you think need to be revised or addressed. I think as the code update gets to this part of the city, we'll have outreach to our design review bodies and stakeholders about code update, but we'll coordinate with the code update team to see what the best way would be to do that.
I actually think it would be helpful for us to do a workshop, given what we just experienced. I feel like our hands were tied with understanding the importance of the entrance into, whether or not it's a hard corner, the entrance into Bricktown. And I even think, well, I don't need to, I think that would be my opinion, it'd be helpful for us to actually have something on that, to give us more teeth when we get applications for this. It so happened that the LED thing worked out well as that was happening, because remember when they did the spud to get around, thankfully that has been rectified, but I think the plans and the updates to the plans were almost done when that was happening, so we didn't have this long lag, but I don't think we want to wait 3 or 4 years before we fix this moving forward. So that's my 2 cents.
What would be the process for calling special meeting for something like that?
So it's just something that staff has to post with the city clerk, and there's a
Yeah.
requirements in the code for how far in advance we do that.
So, and I guess to be clear, because we don't always have items for consideration, it could be one of our regular meetings. We could, I mean, I feel like we've done that in the past. We hadn't necessarily called a special meeting, but gave the staff adequate notice so that we could sort of be prepared to have a discussion and then have it as an item too. And I'm not saying, I'm asking, because it feels like that's maybe one of the approaches.
No, I think a good strategy, because we do often have months where there's no items, would be to use our same meeting time, but instead have that as a workshop. We could have it at Embark instead of in here, so that it's a little less, you all can sit across from each other, not around a horseshoe. So that's a good idea.
So I guess we'll be in communication for a possible next meeting for something like that with staff.
Yep, we'll touch base with the code update team, because I'm sure they'd want to be involved in any discussion from you all about your regulations, and get back with you guys on possible times, dates and times.
Sounds good.
All right.
I had just a brief comment. I guess, I'm sorry, I'm
No,
jumping in.
this is
Your turn.
comments from committee members. So.
All right, so, I mean, so, and about the issue, and I guess just as a point maybe of, I've unfortunately been on this committee for a while. I shouldn't say unfortunate, I love working with you guys, but it just feels like it's been a while. So, there have been times in the past where, so understanding sort of some of the concerns and the comments about the use and rights and all those things, and where the position of this, like the role of this body. I mean, obviously, we don't have to vote affirmatively for anything, is my understanding, right? I mean, so there are implications, ramifications to how we vote. So in this instance, I feel like we had a somewhat contentious meeting when this parking lot thing was presented, in talking about issues. So maybe to my colleague Dotson's point about understanding or having a chance to workshop these issues in regards to parking lots, probably important for a place like Bricktown. But then I think there's just the aspect of the design process, which is a part of why I voted no. I probably should have said this earlier, at least so the applicant would appreciate some of these things. But it feels like we didn't get a chance to discuss the design outside of, well, this is a use, it meets code. But we have in the past sort of encouraged, right, conversations about what would be more acceptable, or what would be sort of compromises or opportunities up front. And there's always the opportunity to have those conversations. I guess I was a little taken aback about I get the challenge that the timing of these things happen, because it's months at a time. But I was just really a little taken aback at not being able to see the results of the feedback that was given, because I felt like maybe we gave feedback the last time around, right, wrong, or indifferent, and we had another constructive conversation. But they were both on the premise of approving or not approving, not on the premise of the design. So in my head, I'm just thinking about ways to make that less contentious if possible, because the ship sailed for me on the parking use. Like, buildings need parking. It is what it is. But I do think there's something to be said for the design element, and feels like today we had a forced compromise a little bit versus I guess we just had better experiences in the past. So I want to make that statement because.
And I think where part of the point of the workshop for me is to actually, the fact that it hit code with what they designed. I don't want to overstate how it makes me feel, but it doesn't make me feel good inside. Because to me, that was a pretty minimal, basic design. And so the bigger issue for me was that I understand if this is what code says and this is what they should be able to get away with, I think we have to increase code to say, to improve, not increase, to take that minimum standard and put it in a different place, to where we're not having to try to twist someone's arm to do what I would say would be like what's just a better design and more human design.
Yeah, I would say that was something that I wasn't sure myself. Is like, I know we are a design review committee, so design in the sense of they have to meet code, but also there's some objective to what that looks like. And I think one of the things that would have been helpful is if we had some sort of like, and this goes back to a future, when we get together to look at the code, is just require a little bit more visual understanding of what, like perspectives or elevations or something like that. Because I think at the end of the meeting, it was, the point was that we understand that the parking lot is going to be there, but we're looking at the overall big picture of the district and the pedestrian experience, and we were wanting them to meet us in that point of creating that experience. Even though it's a parking lot, it didn't matter. We still want that experience for the pedestrians. So just, yeah, I agree. I think I would have liked to maybe see the results of that with some renderings or something, with more them taking our recommendations for the type of plants, more of the prairie look that we are looking for, and then feeling good about what we were agreeing to. So.
And I'll say, to some extent, that's direction to staff. We typically don't ask for renderings of something like a parking lot. It's usually pretty simple. But I think that's good feedback for us to keep in mind when one of the big concerns is that streetscape and that experience that, we absolutely could have pressed the applicant to say it would be really helpful to get a rendering, some perspective drawings. So I don't think we want to codify requirements that people provide, certain documents, because we want to have that flexibility when it's needed or not. But we'll keep that in mind for future cases. So.
All right, thank you. The next meeting date, let's see, is December 20th. Sorry, am I looking at the wrong? Is January? Sorry.
January 11th.
11th, yes. This is the longest Bricktown meeting I have been a part of. So, but thank you. The meeting adjourns at 10:40 a.m.
Do we have a meeting in January? Do we have any applications? Is it possible that our workshop might be that fast?
We could.
Oh, that's right.
It's a holiday.
Well, so one.
I'm just excited for a workshop.
One factor in that, that would potentially work out. Desiree is leaving us for just before the holidays. So this will be her last Bricktown meeting. She's going to
get to vote on that?
Yeah. I would love it if we got to vote on it. I'm highly inconvenienced. But she's taking a position with the state and is going to move into accounting and get some more education, and it's a wonderful opportunity for her, and a very sad one for us. So I don't know what our admin staff situation will be like mid-January. A workshop isn't a lot of work you post an agenda, you don't have to clerk it in PrimeGov the way you do like this. But we'll look at that. So.
Thank you. I will re-adjourn again at 10:41.